Good evening and welcome. Thank you for being here. My name is Paul Moak, and you should have Doug Rule standing here. But I got a call from him just about an hour ago, and his 15-year-old family dog named Adam, I don't know if that's the first dog or not, but they had to take him to the vet and put him down tonight. So Doug is not with us, and so we're going to move along pretty rapidly. If you need to go back and get more food, or you need to move your chair around, or you need to slip out of the room, any of those things are fine. So it's informal, but we'll move pretty fast. We have a lot of ground to cover. So why don't we have a prayer as we begin, and then we'll start. Dear Heavenly Father, we just thank you tonight for this opportunity to be gathered together. We thank you for the beauty of today. We thank you for each person, each family that's represented in this room today. We thank you for them, their commitment to this church, to your kingdom through this church. We pray for our time together, that it'll be honoring to you, the things that are said or the things you desire us to say. These things we pray in the name of your Son, our Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen. So tonight we are... I have a microphone. I don't have any speakers. So this is being recorded. That's why we have the microphone. If you want to come up a little closer, that'll be fine. Okay. So there's a lot of things going on technology-wise in this room. Hopefully we won't get confused. But there's a lot of things that have occurred prior to tonight, and so I want to kind of give you a little background so you kind of understand some of the meetings that have taken place and some of the things that have gone on that bring us here to this room tonight. And it all kind of begins back in the summer of 2015 when the church voted to adopt a new debt resolution. We agreed to borrow up to $10 million. We owed $4 at the time, so we used $4 initially, and that left $6 million that we did not use at that time. And the motion called for that $6 million to be used to address deferred maintenance and the rehab needs of the church. And the Building and Maintenance Committee was responsible for overseeing that and carrying it out. And so the Building and Maintenance Committee in 15, 16, 17 have all been working on that. And what they've been trying to do is to figure out each year what are our most pressing needs, kind of put them in an order, a priority, and figure out what's the best way to address it, if it needs to have an architect or bids done, those types of things, if we need approval, all those steps. And so about 35 projects have been completed since that loan was enacted in 2015. The largest project was just approved by the church on a Wednesday night about a month ago. It's around $3 million. It's to address our mechanical system, the heating and cooling. This is a very large complex. It's a very big system. It's 30 years old. It really has never been worked on much since then. And so a big portion of that $6 million is going there. When that project and the other projects are completed that have been approved, like the restroom that's being added down here as you come in off of President Street. Yes, ma'am.
I can't hear you.
Would you want to come over a little closer? Come on over a little closer. Why don't you come?
We don't have any sound or anything. The lettuce is crunching so loud.
That's good. Well, come sit right here and you'll be about as good as we can do.
I'm not hearing you. No. Okay.
Janet, why don't you come right here? So as I said, most of that $6 million is accounted for. There's a little bit left, and I'm sure they'll be working that as they go forward. But as they realized, leadership, building and maintenance, finance, the other groups that were involved with all of this over the years, that we didn't have enough resources in that $6 million to address all that was needed, leadership created a task force in May of this year, and they assigned that task force the responsibility of looking at 5 specific areas on our campus and outreach to the community to bring back to leadership a recommendation for those specific areas. And so that task force was to recommend concepts and estimates It was recognized that this would be a cash-only basis, that we would not be borrowing any money, which would mean there would need to be a capital campaign to generate the funds. And so that recommendation was presented to leadership on September the 11th, and they recommended that the recommendation go forward. And so these are the people that make up the task force: Roddy DePriest, Melissa Hedeman, David Marin, Taylor Sledge, Billy Van Deventer, Andy Wimberly, and myself. We've been working closely with Richard Dean, who will be up here in a few minutes to share with you some of the things that he's doing. We created a timeline, and so on this timeline, there are a series of presentations like the one you're hearing tonight that have taken place. It started on the 25th of September. There are 9 standing committees in the church. It was presented to 5 of those committees that night, along with the former deacon chairman, along with the ministerial staff. The next night, Tuesday night, it was presented to the remaining 4 committees of the church, along with what's called the stakeholders in the next generation spaces. When we say next generation spaces, we're talking about from birth through high school, preschool, nursery, children, student areas. So people that volunteer in those areas, teach in those areas, have kids in those areas were invited. And for both of those meetings, the spouses were invited. And then Thursday of that week, 2 days later, there was a meeting with the Revelation Choir, and they meet, Reflexes Choir, in the morning time, and Tom and Eva invited in other senior adults. So you had 3 meetings very close together. 225 people attended those 3 meetings to hear the same presentation. At the end of each of those presentations, they were asked 2 questions on a piece of paper to fill out. And here are the 2 questions. Number 1, do you believe the presentation you've heard is the proper direction for our church at this time? And number 2, would you or your family, do you believe you would financially support it? So those 225 people answered those questions. The results were that 215 of them answered both of those questions yes. 2 people answered both of those questions no. There's no names or anything like that on the cards. It's just simply yes or no. And then the other 8 were some combination of yes and no. So over 95% checked yes in both boxes, which gave leadership the belief that we should go forward and take it to the next step. So it went to the deacons on October the 3rd, a presentation. They were not asked to vote that night. They were just an opportunity to hear the same presentation you're hearing. And then the following week, on the 10th of October, was a regularly scheduled deacons meeting. It was on the agenda, and it was voted for unanimously that it be presented to the church. And so you may have heard Sunday that Levon announced it. It's been sent out electronically. It was in our bulletin on Sunday. So we will have a vote on October the 29th at the end of our Sunday morning service as to whether the church believes this should go forward or not. And so between the deacons meeting on the 10th and the 29th, there are several meetings scheduled like the one you're attending tonight, where it gives every church member an opportunity, if they want to come, to hear the presentation. She's recording it tonight. I think it's going to go out live stream perhaps tomorrow, so those that can't physically come could watch it if they want to. So those are the steps that have been taking place. So that gives us a pretty large group of people, 225, that kind of made the decision with their vote that this would go forward. It's been presented to the deacons a week before they were asked to vote on it. It's made available to the church before you're asked to vote on it. The idea is that everybody kind of understands what's being recommended prior to the time that you're asked to make a decision on it. And all of this kind of leads up as a precursor to a capital campaign. So these are the different dates that the presentations have been given. We're obviously October 19th, and there's another one next Tuesday night, the 24th. So if you think about this whole concept, you look at it kind of in phases. Phase 1 was when the leadership committee created the task force, gave us a written assignment that we're to bring back estimates and concepts of these different areas of what should be done in those areas. That was done on September the 11th. And so then we entered into phase 2, which started that night when they approved it. And it's been going forward through these different steps, and now we're working toward presenting it to the church for church approval. If we approve it on the 29th, we'll go into phase 3, which is a campaign phase. The campaign itself will become public in the spring of 2018, probably in February for about 5 weeks. And the time from November 1 until the campaign started would be a quiet phase where all the preparation and work for the campaign would be done. The final phase would be phase 4, and that's after the church has approved it and the campaign is completed. We know what resources are available, and that's when you'd move from concepts and estimates to actual documents that you can put out for a bid and know the final numbers. So there may be some questions some of you might have tonight about what's going to be this in that particular area of the church, or how exactly is this going to be done. And we're probably going to tell you we don't know. We have a concept, we know kind of what it's going to be, but until you really get over here and do the final work, and Richard will talk more about that when he's up here, and actually put it out for bid and know the details specific, we won't be able to answer some of those questions. We got a microphone now. Does this work? Can you hear any better?
Yes.
Good. I'll just hold it if that's okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so sorry about that. Hopefully this will be a little bit better. So the 5 specific areas we call the next generation spaces: the nursery, preschool, children, student. Fellowship Hall East is the most used space on our campus. A lot of different groups use it literally throughout each week. The sanctuary, and then we have a mission component. And so what we ask the question perhaps, why these areas? Well, these 5 areas are identified as the primary gateways to our church. These are the main paths that people come through when they choose to come and become a member of our church. They're not the only ways, but they are the main ways. It's where we do our worship. It's where we transfer the next generation. And some of these are our most used and most flexible spaces. So why these areas? They're important, but when you look back at them, Fellowship Hall, some of you recall, we began using in the 1980s. And we initially had 3 Sunday morning services in there, back to back every Sunday morning. As the area north of the atrium was rehabbed, the sanctuaries expanded and so forth. And literally since the mid-'80s, almost 30 years ago, there's nothing been done in that room other than we replaced the carpet once. And yet, sometimes there's over 1,000 meals in there served a week, and it's just kind of old and tired. The sanctuary came online in October of 1989, and other than putting the screens in there in the early 2000s, there's really not much been done in there as well. The nursery preschool also came online in 1989, the same time as the sanctuary. We did change the theme of it in the early 2000s. Some of you may not have been down there in recent years, but that theme is pretty old. And then children's space is 1 floor above us. It came online in the mid-'80s as well. And literally there's really nothing that's been done up there in those 30 years. The student area is across the way in the CLC, the 2nd floor over there. And it came online, I believe, in 2002. And there has been a lot of use by young people in 15 years, and it shows. So we have our main gateways to the church really have had very little done to them in a long time. So we might ask the question, why now? We don't have a pastor. Some people might say our last number of years have not been so smooth, and does it make sense to embark on a capital campaign with these conditions going on? And our response would be why not now? These are areas that need to be addressed, and we're not recommending new programs, positions. Those aren't responsibilities that were given to our committee. We're just talking about facilities. And really, when you step back and look at it, and hopefully one of the things you'll leave here tonight with a better understanding is that these changes are designed to impact the next generation. And so it's really a focus on those people that are coming behind us. When I talk about us, behind old people like me. The recommendation is well within our capacity to accomplish if we desire to do so. if we put this in front of God and pray about it, become unified, and believe this is what He wants us to do, we have the capacity to do it. When we've done fundraising before, capital campaigns in the 80s, we did one that was for such a time as this. We did one at the end of 2000s, end of the 1990s, early 2000s, called Vision for Life. That was primarily the CLC across the street. Both of those were 3 to 4 times our annual giving was the amount of money that we were trying to raise. Come on in. Come find a place. You're welcome. This is going to be less than 1 year's giving to the budget, the amount that we're recommending. So years ago, I heard a guy speak. He was doing a fundraiser for the Baptist Hospital Cancer Center. His name was Jerry Panis. He was kind of well-known fundraiser. And he said, you know, we got some bad news and some good news and some bad news. He said, the bad news is we got a lot of things around here broke and need fixing. The good news is we have the money to do it. The bad news is that money's in your pocket. And so that's kind of where we are with this whole thing. You're going to see a lot of charts and slides tonight, but if you can only remember one, this is the one that I would want you to remember. This is a chart that represents the membership of our church by age group. Each bar represents a different segment of ages. And you may not be able to read the numbers, but on the left, the shorter bar is 19 to 25. The next bar is 26 to 35. The next bar is 36 to 50, 51 to 65, 66 to 80, and 80 plus. And it doesn't take a math scholar to look at that and realize that our average age is older in this church as opposed to younger. If you think back to the 1980s when we embarked on the For Such a Time as This, and we had the ability to show a similar slide reflecting the age and demographics of our church in those years, I think we'd all agree that the bars would be taller because we had more members back in those days. I think another thing most of us would agree on is there would not be the disparity in the height. We had more people in all the different age groups closer together than what we have today. The people that were so instrumental in what happened in the 80s are like me. I started way over here years ago, and I'm working my way to the right. And a lot of those people have moved on off that chart. They've gone on to their reward in heaven, which is probably a good thing, but at the same time, I think they did the heavy lifting. You know, they started back in the 60s acquiring property, giving it to the church, having the vision, having the dream, raising the money, overseeing the building, and this, that, and the other. And you may not realize it, but that whole For Such a Time as This was paid off in less than 10 years. Mm-hmm. And a lot of those people are no longer here. And we've benefited, I've benefited at least, from what was done by that generation in providing the facilities that my family, my kids, and now my grandkids are able to come to, and really haven't had to do anything on my part for that. So as you look at this and you start thinking about our church and our future, you have to wonder, as we continue to move to the right, the number of people that are coming behind us is just significantly less. And so we're really not successful in reaching out to the next generation in a way that's meaningful. And is that the path that we want to stay on, or do we want to do something different? The young people that we have in this church, we're basically asking them to take their kids and go put them in nursery and children and student spaces that are roughly 30 years old and have had nothing done to them. And they're just not in the condition and the shape, I think, that really is going to attract or desire young people to stay. Let's talk a little bit about the next generation. This is a group of people seated around a table on January the 6th, 2016. The lady in the middle is Leslie Ashford. Some of you know her. She sings in the choir. Her husband is Bill Ashford, an eye doctor. He took the picture. So if you count him, there are 10 people. To the right of Leslie in the plaid shirt is a young man named Graham Calvert. Graham grew up in this church. His parents are Randy and Melody Calvert. And he went to Mississippi State, came to medical school here in Jackson, and then went to Birmingham and Salt Lake City for additional training, and returned to Jackson a few years ago and came back to this church. He works for Mississippi Sports Medicine. And beside him is his bride, Meredith, and beside His bride, Meredith, is another Meredith, Meredith Wharf, who plays in our band you see on the platform on Sunday, and her husband is Bruce Wharf on our staff that works with young couples. On the other side is a young girl named Harper Wise Jones. She grew up in this church as well. Robin Wise is pretty much the head of WMU this year, is her mom. And her husband is named David Jones beside her. And then in the white shirt is a young man named Cody Bailey. Cody grew up down at Ellisville, went to Ellisville to, was that Jones Community College, played baseball there, and then went on to Mississippi State, got a degree in engineering, and after a while decided he wanted to go back and become a lawyer, went to Ole Miss and got a law degree. He met his wife, Jenna, who is from Missouri, that went to SMU and played basketball. And then she went to Ole Miss and got a law degree, and that's where they met and were married and came here. He works for the Brunini firm. And so Graham just kind of had it on his heart to want to start a Sunday school class. And that's what they're talking about at this dinner table on January the 6th, 2016, less than 2 years ago. And I contacted Graham and I asked him to tell me a little bit about what his thinking was, why he wanted to start a class. And he wrote me a long email, and I'm not going to read the whole thing to you, but basically says when he came back here, when he was single, when he was in college, he just really didn't feel like there was a place for him. And it kind of went on after that. He got married, returned here. He said he was sitting in the service one Sunday when Mark Smith was preaching, and he made some comments in that sermon that just resonated with Graham. Graham felt like there were some things that Mark was saying about what we should be doing and reaching out to others that Graham felt like he was called to do, because he really felt like there really wasn't a place for people like him in our church, and you could look around and there weren't many of them. So he contacted Bruce and began talking to Bruce, and Bruce said, well, you might want to talk to Cody, because Cody's been having conversations with me as well. And so this group met with the idea of forming a Sunday school class, which they did a few weeks later, a month or so later, and Graham and Cody and Bill Ashford teach that class, and that's Graham. Since that meeting, they now have 59 on roll, an average attendance of 30, and it's the fastest growing Sunday school class we have in our church. It's non-traditional in the sense that they don't have just married or just singles. They have both, whatever somebody wants to do. And their title is young professional, but I mean, there are all different varieties of folks in there. A lot of them are related to medical or legal community. But they're young people. They use GroupMe technology to communicate. So you see these things flying back and forth on that app all week long, where somebody's grandmother's sick or somebody's getting a new job or this, that, and the other, asking each other to pray for it. They began live streaming their Sunday school lessons back in August, just like Allison's doing tonight with us. And so it's pretty exciting to see what's happening, and they have some ideas to really ramp it up from there and cause more numbers to occur. Here's another class that's next door to the one where Graham and that group meet, and this is a class that started a little over 10 years ago that came out of Ron Mumbauer when he used to do newlyweds and engaged couples. And after the people had been there for several years, they started a new class. Lee and Mary Ann Cope, Elizabeth's mom and dad, are in that class, along with Don and Sarah Williams and Buddy and Linda Huff. Those are kind of the old people that are in there that work with them. That class has been together for a good while, and they're primarily young people, growing families, and they have a love and a heart for missions. And so they kind of came up with the idea that we ought to start some kind of mission project. Some of you may recognize the picture on the screen. That's Little Feet that took place, I think, back in August, and it's been going on for about 6 years. Some of you have probably been to that or seen something about it. They have screens over there, and every time an item is sold, a number shows up on that screen that increases the amount that goes to missions. An email goes to whoever consigned the item to let them know their item sold. All of this, the software to do all of this, was written by some people in that class. And so we've never had a consignment sale at First Baptist. It's not authorized, so to speak. But when they went to Bob Gladney, thank goodness he had enough sense to say, let's go ahead and do it. He didn't ask for permission from anybody. He said, let's just go do it. So we got Graham and his group starting a class that's not the way that we like to do it. You got this young group next door that has done a consignment sale. It's been going on 6 years. During that period of time, they've raised over $500,000 that goes to missions. So how many other classes do we have in the church that have given have resulted in $500,000 coming in over a 6-year period of time? These young people, this next generation, have the ability to do a lot of neat stuff. They just kind of need people like me to get out of the way and let them go do it. And I think we can attract some more people here of that age group that'll change some of those blue bars, but we can't expect them to come here and us tell them, well, you go put your kid in an area that's 30 years old, that's out of date. I think we have to step back and look at it. This is a chart that David Marin, one of the guys on our task force, who'll be chairman of the deacons in 2019, I believe, gave me the other day from a book he read called Comeback Churches, How 300 Churches Turned Around and Yours Can Too. It says the number 2 thing to cause a turnaround in the church is to place emphasis on children. But it also says the number 1 thing is prayer. What would happen, do you think, if our church really got unified and serious in talking to God about asking, how does God want to use our church to reach out to the next generation? How can we be used to disciple the next generation? And I think there's some serious discussions going on related to that. So what we're recommending is an $8 million renovation project, if you will, for these 5 specific areas, along with an outreach to the community that we'll talk about in just a moment. These projects will be on a cash basis only, so they can only be done when money is given. We're expecting this to be a 2-year campaign. Everybody will obviously know about it in 17, but the actual campaign would not become public and actually begin until 2018, probably in February, and then carry on another year beyond that. So the task force would determine which project, what order we would go in, and that's going to be based on the availability of funds and so forth. The areas that we've talked about are nursery, preschool, children, student, Fellowship Hall East, our sanctuary, technology as it relates particularly to television and some of our social media things. There's a mission component, and then we have a contingency built into the $8 million as well. And we'll go a little bit deeper into those numbers in just a moment. But I'm going to ask that Richard Dean come up here and start sharing with you some of the concepts for these 5 different areas. And I think we got to swap some stuff here just for a second.
You're advancing it here, right? How I got it. You didn't use the pointer, Paul. Is it working? I think maybe I think I might use an old-fashioned pointer. Well, thank you, Paul. I want to reiterate our charge for this effort. We were tasked to do 4 things for each of the 5 areas. Preliminary programming, develop conceptual designs, establish specific scopes of work for each of the 5 areas along with estimates of probable cost. The images that I'm going to be showing this evening are going to include design concepts, proposed renovations, floor plan modifications, suggested upgrades of finishes, audio, video, and lighting components, and so forth. It's important that you know that everything that you see tonight is preliminary in nature. Nothing is cast in stone. We will be inviting and encouraging additional input from everyone, certainly from all of the users and stakeholders of each of the areas. And when a project is, or projects are funded and authorized to go forward, at that time, we will go back and do extensive, detailed programming and go through a complete and comprehensive design process. And so that means we have plenty of time to get additional feedback, refine and develop and make sure we get everything right. So this is truly just the first step in this journey. What I will be presenting tonight is a big picture, broad brush overview. And I will try to avoid detail to the extent that I am able, and I will try to move as rapidly as I can. We will start with the nursery preschool area. I'm sure you all know where the nursery preschool area is located. It is on the lower level of the northeast portion of the block. We have North State Street here, College Street here, the drive-through off of State Street. The primary point of entry into the space is here at this point. Secondary entrance off the atrium lobby, Sky Bridge across State Street. You may not be aware of how large this area is. It's about 23,500 square feet. There have been no significant modifications to that area in 28 years, no infrastructure upgrades. We did do cosmetic upgrades in 2004. At that time, we initiated the nature theme throughout that area. You look at these photographs, you see browns and greens, earth tones, warm colors. We use carpet, wall coverings, paint, murals, even structures constructed such as this tree house that reinforce that nature theme. Now the floor plan works like this. There's a primary point of entry and check-in for member parents and guest parents and their nursery and preschoolers. From that point, they're routed to either this area or that area. These are security control points. Those security control points allowed access into this corridor, which is flanked by classrooms on both sides, or this corridor, which is flanked by classrooms on both sides, and they frame a multi-purpose space in the center. I want to call your specific attention to 4 areas that are designated in a pink color. There's a classroom here at the end of the multi-purpose room, 2 classrooms here, and an administrative area here. And if you will keep those in your mind, we will touch on them later because those are areas that we're going to recommend be modified. We had several programming sessions with Bruce Wharf and Marley Howard, David Marin, and others, and we developed a program which can be summarized, which we summarized in these bullet points that you see here. The nature theme has served us well for 13, almost 14 years, but it's time for a new, fresh look. And the consensus is that look needs to be characterized by light and bright and open and colorful. And rather than having a specific theme, we want the spaces to be experiential in nature, and we want to engage the imagination of our children and give them an exciting visual experience. We want to go from 2 security control points to a single security control point, and we want to add some state-of-the-art technology in the area, such as high technology kiosk check-in spaces, which we'll point out, and needless to say, complete upgrades to all finishes in that space. Thank you, Paul. These images are simply concept images. Don't look specifically at them in the sense that they've been specifically designed. They have not, but they give you an idea of what we're talking about. When we talk about using bold color and having three-dimensional activity features and having experiential spaces. And the point we want to make here is that while we want our nursery and preschoolers to learn about Jesus, we want this place to be a place where they want to come. They want to look forward to being here, and we want the parents of those children to want to bring them here and certainly not have any questions in their mind about the appropriateness of the space. So moving forward into the floor plan that modifications that we're proposing, we're suggesting removing that classroom that was in this location, which enables us to make a larger reception and check-in area. We propose removing those two classrooms here and here so that we can open this area up, add glass, and make it transparent to the rear, more visibility back into the interior of the department, and remove a classroom here so that we can enlarge the multipurpose room and have a nicer presentation stage area there. So if we go then and look at a blow-up of this portion of the plan, we see that the primary point of entry into the space would still be in this location. Guest Welcome Center would be here designated by the one. It could be not necessarily that color, but a colorful and inviting place for our guests to be welcomed. Our member parents and children would go to the area designated by the two, which would represent high-tech kiosks, check-in kiosks with touchscreen technology that might look something like that. And then, again, a central point of security control here where all children and preschoolers would be entering into the space. They would first move into what we're calling a welcome portal, which we can go to something that might look like that. And the point there is we want our children going through there to think something special is getting ready to happen. And then when they get into these spaces, they will be opened up, enlarged, and there will be assigned activity areas flanking that welcome portal. And then they would transition through these corridors back to the east, and that would lead them into an open activity area, and they would go into this corridor on the north side of classrooms, or to the south classrooms here. And the multi-purpose area, as we mentioned, would be expanded to accommodate not only multiple activities in this space, but also a puppet stage at the end, and we would be providing theatrical lighting and audio upgrades in that area as well. Now we move to the children's ministry on the 5th floor above us. Our program is summarized here. These bullet points indicate the important things that we wanted to accomplish. Number one, make the welcome center that's in the atrium more inviting. Again, have a high-tech kiosk check-in with touchscreen capability. We want to open up the floor plan. Again, use more color, make it lighter and brighter and more colorful, and use color as part of a wayfinding system to help direct our children to the areas where we want them to go. Again, upgrades of all finishes in that area. The square footage of this area is about a little over 12,000 square feet. Currently, this is the plan as it currently exists. There is a small desk here that where everyone arrives and is welcome and check in. It's not what it needs to be, and we'll touch on that in a moment. But they're directed to one of 2 points of entry into the department, which is arranged around a multi-purpose room. There's a U-shaped corridor here with classrooms surrounding it, a multi-purpose room in the center with a stage at this point, audio-visual control areas here. The important thing I want you to note here, when our children enter at these points, they're looking down corridors that are not necessarily exciting. They're somewhat drab, and we feel like that needs to be improved upon. The multipurpose space is utilitarian and functional, but it's not as exciting as it needs to be, and so that's another thing that we feel needs to be addressed in this process. Now, so what we're proposing is a welcome center that is much more attractive and appealing, and so everyone would be welcomed at this point, and then our children would be directed to one of two check-in points, and the check-in areas are going to, proposed to be opened up. So we're knocking down some walls, not a lot of demolition, but some, so that when our students come in and they go to the interactive kiosk, they can look through the space into the multipurpose room, because we want to make that multipurpose room something really special and really nice. And instead of looking down a dull, drab, long corridor, we're going to take the opportunity to make it an interactive corridor with really colorful, with splashes of color conceivably on walls, ceilings, and floors at these points. And that again could be part of a colorized wayfinding system with flat screen TVs in these locations. And if, again, the kiosk would be interactive, as I mentioned a moment ago. Now, if we focus on the multi-purpose room itself, we would change the orientation of the stage. So the stage would, instead of being here, would be moved to the end of the room. We propose to make it nicer, more dramatic, maybe not quite to that extent, but still a nice stage effect at the end of the room. Loose seating in this portion focused on that stage, and then a fairly large activity area, which might be take advantage of some new technology with projections screens, projectors in the ceiling, so that we can project different kinds of images on the floor there. And those images that are projected could vary depending on the age groups that would be would be assigned to that activity area at different times. So you project different things for first graders as you would for sixth grade. All right, we move from this area across the street to the CLC, Christian Life Center. The upper level south side, it includes the atrium area itself and all the space to the south of the atrium. The program is summarized by these bullet points. As Paul mentioned earlier, that area was opened in late 2001, early 2002. 15 years of heavy usage. If you go over there and look around, you'll see what we mean by the fact that it is taking some, I'm not going to say abuse, but just heavy usage. And so a lot of upgrades need to be done. And we feel again that we have an opportunity to do a new look, create a new look in the atrium lobby, and again, emphasize light, bright, and more color in those spaces. We also have a good bit of furniture that's worn and damaged, needs to be replaced. And if we again are looking at improving and upgrading AVL, audiovisual, and lighting throughout the area, particularly in the main space there. And Paul, you can go ahead and advance that. That's the existing floor plan of that space. Again, it's about 21,500 square feet, a lot of area. This is the go back one, Paul, if you would. The running track, go back two. One more, there we go. Running track here, atrium lobby here, the bridge across State Street, entering into the space at this point. Again, a U-shaped corridor configuration, classrooms on three sides of those corridors, and they frame the CLC auditorium. And if we then focus on the CLC auditorium, the predominant AVL upgrades would take place in this room. We would be enhancing the stage area, adding high definition projectors and screens in these locations, and increase the quantity and quality of theatrical lighting. We would be taking the existing control area here, production booth, and we'd be populating it with new AVL equipment and AVL consoles. The front area of that room, the stage, and with the new screens and so forth, could look something like that. And we're going to be investigating ways to create special lighting effects like you see here for the least cost. Now we move back over into this building, Fellowship Hall East. You all are very familiar with that room. It again is gosh, I guess we opened that room in about 1980, late 87, early 88. A lot of heavy usage in there, as Paul mentioned. It is the most utilized room on our campus. It is used for so many different functions. We have to underscore the notion, concept of flexibility that has to be maintained. We need to do new finishes throughout, certain new lighting, new illumination throughout, and AVL upgrades. And I'll talk about the proscenium when we move forward to the next slide. All the finishes need to be upgraded. As Paul mentioned, the carpet has been replaced once, but it needs to be replaced again. All of we have the 19-foot high folding partitions in that room, which haven't been used for some time. We think they need to be removed, along with the track system that support those panels. And when we do that, we would be reworking the ceilings, replacing all the ceiling tile, which is quite worn, some damaged, and we would be providing LED lighting throughout that space, brighten it up. All new paint and wall coverings, and there's been a lot of homemade additions, modifications to the stage, actually a stage expansion, which needs to be improved upon and made permanent. And the screens that you see here are the standard definition. They would be replaced. New high definition projectors. The lighting, the proscenium would remain in place. The curtains would remain so that we can use them open or closed as we prefer. Again, flexibility is important. Our people are very creative and have done some really nice things with old technology, and so what we need to do is give them some new technology so that they can do even greater things. Now we move to the sanctuary. The program we can summarize in two categories. One, a general classification, the other, audio, visual, and lighting, AVL category. I want to focus your attention on the first bullet point under general. It is very important to all of us that we preserve and protect the architectural and historical integrity of the sanctuary. Many people have come to me and commented and expressed their opinions about that, and I've told all of them that they don't have to worry about that. We're going to protect our sanctuary. The video screen enclosures that were installed in January of 2004, it was the best technology we had available to us at that time. There were certainly some negatives involved with that, which we'll talk about momentarily. Those need to go, need to be replaced with new technology. When that happens, we're able to enlarge the choir from its current capacity of around 240 plus or minus to 285 plus or minus. We're able to enlarge the orchestra from its current capacity of around 50 to around 75 plus or minus. One of the things that was stressed from our AVL and music ministry team is that we need to improve access to the platform, the pulpit orchestra platform, and I'll show you what we mean by that momentarily. The carpet pew cushions have a lot of age on them, need to be replaced, never been replaced. That carpet has served us well, but again, it's time for an upgrade. In the audio-visual lighting area, many of you probably feel as I do when you have experienced on a Sunday by Sunday basis the fabulous music, choir, orchestra, organ, congregational singing. You wonder, well, how can we justify spending a lot of money on AVL in our sanctuary? Well, many of you may have trouble, as I do, hearing, depending on the speaker and depending on where you may be in the room. And so there's nothing more important than clarity of the spoken word. And word is capitalized. There's nothing more important than that. And in order for us to improve and enhance the clarity of the spoken word throughout that room, we have to do some upgrades to the audio system. In addition, the consensus is that we must go to high definition video campus-wide, and so we will do that. That will include LED video walls in the sanctuary. We'll show you some images of what we're proposing there. And broadcast television, and Paul will talk more about this, but broadcast television is so important for outreach for our church, and in order to really enhance the quality of our broadcast television, we need to improve backlighting and front lighting in the chancel area. The choir, the praise team, the orchestra, the preacher, and so forth. So upgrades will be recommended in that area, and there's a lot of work to do in that realm. Now, if we move into the floor plan of the chancel area of the sanctuary, many of you may not have a lot of experience reading plans, so I'll try to do the best I can to help orient you and help you understand what you're looking at, what's projected on the screen. First, to get you oriented, if you can envision College Street being here, the new ramp finally completed and lighting is in place right in this location. The atrium vestibule is here. A corridor that ties those vestibules together we call the East Corridor. And you all know where the sanctuary parlor is. In this location, the usher plate room and security office off of the College Street vestibule. The areas shown in yellow are where those the screen and screen enclosures were placed in '04. And I want to call your special attention to these ramps. Actually, you have a ramp that was constructed on this side, stairs on this side. This access from the East Corridor to the orchestra pulpit platform is very important. It's used very heavily by not only our choir members, but orchestra members transporting various kinds of equipment. Certainly in carols and special presentations, it's used quite heavily. But so this access is important, and you remember from our bullet point on the program, our AVL music team said we really need to move those, if we possibly can, to an area that's more convenient to the front area of the platform. And so we will momentarily look at what we're going to suggest there. I want to call your attention to a women's restroom here, which presently exists, but we're going to enlarge and make much nicer. Men's restroom here that's going to be expanded and made much nicer. They're shown in the proposed form that they will be in. We'll start construction in probably January, and that construction will probably take 2 to 3 months. But in any case, this East Corridor would remain, and so the lower area of the choir loft is really terminated where these ramps are located. So if we move to the upper level, and of course this seating here rises up and is over the sanctuary parlor on this side and the plate committee room and security room on this side. And the video screen enclosures I mentioned a moment ago, that one of the big negatives about that when they were installed is that it really eliminated our low seating areas from really being useful. Even with flat screens on the back of them, it's certainly far, far less than desirable or even acceptable, so we've got a chance to fix that. Also, you notice that the way these access ways are placed, it really limits what we can do with the choir and in terms of expanding the choir. And some of you may be wondering, and I'm going to go ahead and interject this at this point, why we would think it's important to expand the choir and expand the orchestra. Well, some of you may be familiar, there's a scholarship program in place for orchestra musicians, and there's also an Arts Academy program for 9th and 10th graders, and so these have really become very important areas of outreach for our orchestra, to say nothing of outreach we get through expansion of our choir. So we expand our choir and orchestra. We are expanding our church body, and that's extremely important, as Paul has already mentioned. So let's go on to the next slide, and we're going to suggest some demolition. I want you to take note of the fact that we're not suggesting a lot of demolition, selective demolition. In a few locations, the removal of a wall between the security office and the current usher plate room, removal of a portion of this wall here, and of course the enclosure around the screens would go away, and these walls would be removed on both sides. And the platform, which currently in its current location actually includes some homemade construction that was done in these areas, it needs to be made permanent. So we're going to be demolishing all that temporary platform construction. And then when we do that, then we're able to go forward and show what we are then able to do on the lower level of that sanctuary orchestra platform. You may wonder why we were tearing out portions of walls here. Well, the only way we can really improve access and reposition it to the front of the platform is to capture parts of these spaces, the part of the plate room and all of the security office and the sanctuary parlor space, which by so doing enables us to create an entry point and ramp up to a platform here that leads onto the orchestra pulpit platform. Same thing on the other side, and that while we're doing that, we have demoed that existing areaway here and access way there, which enables us to extend the choir on both sides. And while we're doing that, we propose expanding the face of the platform, pulling it forward. We would not be losing any more pews than already have been removed, and we provide more space on the platform, not only for the expansion of the orchestra, but also to provide room for the space for the praise team between the orchestra and the face of the pulpit. Now, we interjected this slide so that we can show you when we take the space where the sanctuary parlor is currently located, we have to move that sanctuary parlor to some place that's convenient and close enough to the sanctuary. There's some music library space here that Levon is willing to give up. He can move that music library space up above in the upper levels of that portion of the building and make this space available. It's, I think Paul estimates about 36 steps from the existing entry point to the new entry point to the sanctuary parlor. We also have private restrooms here and a prayer room there. So it's in a good location and can, we think, function very, very well. Now we go to the upper level of the choir loft, and you see that we now have been able, with the demolition that we have suggested, we're able to open up the low seating on both sides that can function for not only expansion of congregational seating, but also overflow seating of the choir. We've been able to expand the choir out to these points so that we're able to increase the seating capacity of the choir, as I mentioned a moment ago, from around 240 to around 280, 285. And we can do it using only 7 rows in the choir. We do not need to use the 8th row any longer, and that gives us a place to put to relocate the screens to, but the screens are actually going to be LED video walls that are quite thin, and they would be placed in this location. We would maintain circulation through these entry points so the choir can feed in from the top the way it does now, can feed in from the bottom underneath these areas. We're adding glass rails here to enhance visibility from the low seating onto the platform. Now, what's that going to look like? Well, first, let's show you what it looks like from two different vantage points today. Last Sunday, this Sunday. This is a three-dimensional model that is accurately drawn. We got a man in this room that's really good at that. He didn't do these images, but he's quite capable of doing so. I'm talking about Mark Rich. But if you happen to sit in this portion of the sanctuary, this is what you're seeing today. You'll notice that these boxes are the way they're placed, and with these access ways back here, the choir seating is really limited at this point on both sides. And you also will note that these boxes placed in this location obscure a good bit of the Gothic tracery and display pipes there. So those of you that are concerned about that, depending on where you sit, you're currently blocked from view of a lot of that beautiful neo-Gothic detailing. And these screens are about 10 feet high by 13 feet long, and they're the old standard technology. And one other thing, Paul, before we change, some of you might have noted last Sunday, in fact, we had keyboardists here, we got David playing the drums, and about a good 20% of that screen is obscured by orchestra personnel and equipment on a typical Sunday. So it doesn't really work that well, and we see an opportunity to make it better. So instead of what you see there, what we're proposing is something that would look more like this. And these screens would be 20 feet in length instead of a little over 13 in length, and they would be almost 13 in high instead of 10 high. Yet they really don't obscure any more of the Gothic detailing than what is currently obscured, and we feel, and as you can see, the choir can expand all the way now to here, and this is an access point, the new entry points, which would be mirrored on both sides of the platform. And then if we swing around and we look at a view, present-day view, looking down the primary axis of the sanctuary, this is what we see. Again, you see the constricted areas of the choir. It's amazing what Levon is able to do with that choir with those constraints. But in any case, while this is what you see now, what we're proposing is look like this. Again, full component of choir expanded to, and by the way, we'll have flexibility there. Levon, if let's just say he's not able to seat 280 or 285, he can easily drop off the first row, which we does do at times now, drop off a few at each end, on each side, and get right back to that number. So he has a great deal of flexibility. I think he's very comfortable with this. So I think one other thing I want to say before I sit down is that the renovations that we're proposing in the sanctuary are very, very minimal in relative terms, relative to everything that we're doing. The hard construction modifications in that room are very, very minimal, and the AVL upgrades are much more expensive than that, and that number, we're hoping that through a complete analysis and vetting process, we can bring that number down as well.
One quick question.
Yes, sir.
When you were talking about the preschool area,
Yes, sir.
it looked like you were eliminating a couple of classrooms.
We-
You weren't replacing.
Correct. We're eliminating 3 classrooms and 1 administrative area, and Bruce Wharf and Marley Howard are comfortable that we still have ample capacity.
Thank you, Richard. He does pretty amazing work, and so it's been a pleasure working.
The video screens above where the balconies are, will they still remain there?
I'm sorry.
Two little
Yeah.
screens out front, I got it.
Ask me one more time. I'm not sure I followed what you
The
asked.
two screens, like on the balconies?
Oh, back in the room.
Uh-huh.
That's going to be part of the overall mix. That final decision's not been made. I don't think they'll be eliminated. They may be improved.
There are other smaller screens that we'll be looking at for different locations so that there's not an area in the room that it does not afford an occupant, a congregant, to be able to see a screen. If you're way back in the back, we've got some ideas on how that can be enhanced.
Is there space behind that screen and the organ pipes, Richard, when you're looking at, it doesn't look like, I mean, it's, the perspective here is like it's up against them.
No,
but
you've
it's not.
got about 4 feet of clearance.
Okay.
So it won't block the sound of the organ?
No. And again, those panels are only about 2.5, 3 inches wide. So depending on where you're sitting, you can actually see behind them. Yes, sir.
As far as the blocking the organ sound, what you may not know is that entire back wall is made out of grill cloth. It's not a solid wall, so the organ sound comes out of the entire wall.
That's correct, Dave. Dave Edmonds is correct. All of this is sound transparent.
Correct.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Does it look like it? It is.
It is.
Thank you, Richard. Let's keep moving, and we're going to talk a little bit about a mission component. And we've talked about reaching out to the next generation, and the mission component that we want to recommend, in essence, does the same thing. And it's using Mission First, a facility we've been involved with and a relationship we've had for 20 years now, and using their location to create an early learning center in that part of town, a safe and superior learning center for kids 3 to 5 years old, using Christian teachers whose passion is to prepare young students to be Christ followers. Some of you are familiar with First Presbyterian Day School, and the model that they have there is basically the same model we're talking about, but it would be at Mission First and obviously geared toward the people in that community. There's a lot of things written about the success of young people when they have an opportunity to go to early education. It's all over the internet. It says you have an opportunity to increase employment, income opportunities, reduction in crime, reduction in welfare dependency, savings in remedial education, improvement in health outcomes, and earning gains associated with a higher degree of education. That does not seem like many people debate that there's a lot of value in having young people at that particular age, 3 to 5, exposed to early learning. So there are positive measures, both economically and social, for doing that. But what we're talking about is laying on top of that a Christian education, to do it in a Christian environment. And so when that happens, the kids are taught that they're created in the image of God, they're valuable, it teaches the need for personal relationship with Christ, it becomes kingdom driven, not material and earthly driven, teach morals, teach kids to love their neighbors, the value of dependence on a creator, and that the Bible is the inspired word of God. So the bottom line is the introduction of Christianity in a child's education motivates them to focus on a lifetime and eternal goals. It gives them a hope they may never have if they weren't exposed to a program like this through a place like Mission First. So our mission is to create a safe and superior learning environment for inner city Jackson kids aged 3 to 5, using Christian teachers whose passion is to prepare young students to be Christ followers and kingdom builders prepared for success in the first grade. This is not something that just came about in the last few months. This began actually in 2011 when Lee Thigpen got a small grant and began doing some studies on this particular area that we're talking about. Between 2011 and 2013, he and Gary Heron, who some of you might know, that's the master at First Presbyterian Day School. He's been there, I think this is maybe his 30th year or something like that. He and Lee both went to Memphis and also to Birmingham to physically visit with people that are doing this in those other markets to gain information from them and do research. We've had people in our church that are aware of this and have been supporting it with prayer and certainly financial. The Women's Ministry Grace Bible Study has adopted this and has raised and given over $50,000 in the last few years to help move toward the ability to actually begin this program. It would be a tuition-based program, but obviously the kids that are being marketed to would not more than likely have the ability to pay that tuition, so there would be scholarships that would be granted. And so the startup to do this, and we're talking about hopefully in the fall of 2018, a little less than a year from now, is estimated to open with 24 students. That would be 2 classrooms of 12 students each, 3 years of age. The estimated cost to get it up and going and to run the first year plus is $200,000. There's a belief that there are other sources of money that would become available as time goes along. I think once Lee had a year or so under his belt and knew what his actual cost per student was, it would be pretty, I think, well received to go to Sunday school classes and individuals and ask people if they want to scholarship a kid for X number of dollars. And some of you know that First Pres started an inner city mission along about the time we did. And in recent years, they've come to Mission First and asked that we, in essence, take over their program. They help financially, so we have a second location that's called the Neighborhood Christian Center is their name. And so this would be a model that would be replicated, that once it got going and could figure out exactly how it was doing, there's an opportunity to expand it into other areas in our community as resources are available. There would be a selection process in order to get the scholarships. It's not just whoever walks in the door. They would test the kids just like they're tested at First Pres. There would be a track for the parents. The parents would have some obligation, or the caregiver or a single parent, whatever the situation is. As I said, it would start with 2 classes of 3-year-olds, 12 in each class, a teacher and an assistant teacher in each classroom. The next year, you would add 2 more classes. Those 3-year-olds would become 4-year-olds. You'd add 2 more classes of 3-year-olds. In the third year, you would do the same thing so that you would wind up with 6 classes, 2 3-year-old, 2 4-year-old, 2 5-year-old, total of 72 students in those 6 classrooms. Take 3 years to ramp up to that. So this is, we believe, important because we're committed to serving Jackson, and certainly that's a key part of our community. And if we're going to be successful as a church here, we have to support our community in many different ways, and certainly answering the call to change the lives through a Christ-like presence in the youngest generation of Jackson. So that's kind of the mission component that's recommended in what we're talking about tonight. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a few moments, but I want to go now and break into the $8 million and give you more detail on those numbers and where they come from. As we started out tonight, we said we were talking about estimates and concepts, so we don't have any bids. So where did these numbers come from? So let's talk a little bit about that. Richard and his team work with builders and projects every day, and so they have some degree of understanding of what it costs to paint a wall or put down carpet or those kind of things. So some of the numbers are arrived at simply using math, taking the amount of square footage and knowing what's to be done there and multiplying it out. Some of the estimates involve contractors that have actually looked at some of the spaces we're talking about. There's a project that Richard mentioned on the ramp, the restroom that's under construction now coming in off of President Street. The restrooms he mentioned that will start after January. The contractor that's been the low bidder on those has seen the recommendations that Richard just presented to you in the sanctuary for removing some of those places and replacing them with the things he showed. He's looked at that. He hasn't given a bid, but he's given an estimate. And so that's another source of numbers. Richard mentioned the carpet and the cushions. Again, we don't have bids, but we've got people in those industries that have come and looked and have given us prices. And then the biggest piece of the money, when you look at the whole thing, a little more than half, is the AVL, the audiovisual and lighting technology. There's a company named Clark in Atlanta. It's a nationally recognized company that we actually, as a church, entered into a contract with in 2016. You may remember our task force wasn't even created until May of 17. So there was discussion going on with Clark well before we got involved. When this concept was presented to the deacons in May of 17, Doug Rule, the chairman of the deacons, reported to the deacons that there would be a capital campaign associated with it if we chose to go forward, and the estimated amount would be $11.5 to $12.5 million. You've heard we've already said $8 million. So I got with Bob Gladney after that meeting, and I said, how did y'all arrive at the 11.5 to 12.5? And they had been working with Clark, and those numbers from Clark for these spaces was about $8.5 million by itself. And so when we began, we kind of took a different approach and had conversation with Clark and said, you know, we want your expertise, but we don't want everything you got. We just need you to tell us what we need. You work with churches all across the country. You've been to our facility. You know what we have. Give us a recommendation on that. So they've come back in late August with some numbers that were $4.5 million as opposed to $8.5. So they dropped it $4 million in just a few months. But as Richard said a minute ago, I think, Richard thinks, and others that have looked at it, that as we get further into it with Clark, that we believe some of those numbers will come down some more. But those are the numbers that have been used to create what we're presenting to you tonight. And as I've said at the beginning, it's a cash-only program, and we are only limited, we can only spend the money on the spaces that are identified in the program. So if we get through and there's money that's been given that has not been spent, it will just sit there, and a recommendation will come from leadership to the church as to what do you do with that other money. Do we go do Fellowship Hall West? Do we do some other part of our facility? Do we pay down on debt? Do we do whatever? So there's a lot of other things that could be made in terms of a decision if we can get through this and not spend all the money. But if we had $8 million in the bank today and could write a check, I believe Richard and I are pretty comfortable that everything we've presented tonight could be done. We're just hoping that it can be done for less. So here's the makeup of that $8 million, and Richard talked about square footage. There's about 100,000 square feet in total for the spaces that we're looking at, which is a large amount of space when you start talking about carpeting and painting and ceiling tile and lighting and all those kinds of things. We'll start with the preschool area. There's 23,500 square feet in that area, and Richard went through with you the changes that they would recommend there. And those changes are approximately $685,000. If you're a math person or a construction person, all these construction, not the AVL, all the construction works out to be around $30 a foot when you figure all the spaces. Some are a little bit more, some are a little bit less, but it averages about $30 a foot. $685 to do the preschool, $135 for technology, a total of $800. We move to the children above us, $391. And again, Richard talked about redoing that area, $359,000, plus technology, $161. So $520,000 of the total would go in that area. If we move across the way, the CLC is another large area, over 20,000, over 21,000 square foot, redoing basically everything from the running track south, and those numbers are $750,000 plus the technology of $269 for a total of a little over $1 million on the CLC. If we come over to this side on the Fellowship Hall below, it's a little less than 10,000 square feet, about $300,000 to do that, plus the technology, which brings it in a little bit under $1 million. Sanctuary is all the things Richard mentioned in terms of construction is $858,000. I will tell you that the carpet and the cushions together are about $550 of that $850. So it's about $300 in regular construction, taking out the boxes and fixing the sanctuary parlor and those kind of things. And then the sanctuary technology issues are $1.8 million, which brings it up to 2.750 roughly for the sanctuary. We talked about Mission First, $200,000. $150 of that would be a startup budget for the first year. It would take about 50, Lee estimates, to do the things they need to do to finish getting the facility ready to be a classroom. They've talked to Mississippi College about having interns from there coming and working at Mission First in this, and that's been well received. And so there's a lot of moving pieces and things that would need to be done, but that would be the estimate on Mission First. Then television equipment, and I'm using that term loosely because it includes a lot of different things. We have a control room, some of you perhaps have never seen, but that's kind of the brains of everything technology-wise here in the church, and it's just old. It's just old. When they came and looked at it, they started taking pictures because they'd never seen that equipment. They had read about it before. We can't do, you know, I bet most of you have a TV, maybe whatever size might change, but most of you are watching television on a thin screen smart TV at your home. And you're probably watching it in high definition because that's the industry standard. We're like 4 levels below that. We can't send out a high def signal. We can't do the things that the current marketplace is doing. So we're not talking about going above that. We're just trying to get in the game where the game currently is. And there's a little over $1 million in here for that. Here's some information on broadcast television, your main networks. The way they count this thing is they look at the old signal that used to go out over an antenna and figure out how many homes are in that signal. And so for us, the signal kind of goes down toward Natchez, down to Lincoln County, circles around. And in that area, there's 331,000 homes in 21 counties. On Sunday morning between 10 and 11 o'clock when we're broadcasting our service, 41% of those televisions or those homes have their television on. That doesn't mean there's somebody watching it. It could be a whole room full of people. It could be a nursing home, or it could be nobody watching it. But the industry method of measuring says that 41% of those televisions are on, and of those, 8% of them are tuned to our broadcast. And we've been on television since the mid-50s, 60 years. And we have, on average, right at 11,000 people, 11,000 homes, again, can't count the individual people, 11,000 homes that are watching our service every Sunday. And it's not the same 11,000 every Sunday. It moves around. Some of you have heard Jason Allen, Dr. Allen, that's been our interim here for a while, talking about coming into Jackson and going to different stores or whatever, and people figure out who he is. And he'll ask them, well, do you go to First Baptist? No. But they know he's got 5 kids because they do go to First Baptist because they watch it on TV. They're just not members here. So it's an outreach we've had for many, many years. It's the highest rated show at 10 o'clock in this market. There's more people watching that particular hour of our service than any other show, which is very unusual for a paid broadcast. Usually that's not the case. And all this information is from September of 2017. But on top of that, now it's become this idea of social media. And it's really kind of taken the world by storm. When you start thinking about Facebook, the average visit is 20 minutes a day. The average person checks Facebook 13.8 times a day. I know we go through our place, I see employees, you know, they got that phone out there. I don't know what they're doing, but they're not working. And there's a new phrase that I've learned. It's called screen first. And it's the generation of people out there, the first thing they do is look at their screen. They're saying 50% of 18 to 24-year-olds go on Facebook when they wake up. It's the first thing they do. Average person will spend nearly 2 hours on social media every day. 80% of the 18 to 49-year-olds watch YouTube, and they upload 300 hours of content to YouTube every minute. Now, I don't know who watches all that, but it's unbelievable what's taking place in the world that we live in. It's so different from what I grew up with and what perhaps some of you grew up with. 47% of millennials say that social media drives their decision making. 19% for other ages. This is recent information from Forbes. So they find the message on social media, and it influences them to what their peers are saying about whatever the issue is. Facebook, there's 700 million users worldwide. Number 2 is way behind. 91% of teens use YouTube, 81% of millennials, and then as you get older, it's kind of like those blue bars. You keep moving to the right, it's lower and lower and lower. But we're trying to reach those on the left. We're trying to reach the younger people. We've got to realize and understand how they make decisions and what's important to them and how they communicate. And so it's just hard to say that social media is not an option for us. And we know how to do it. Allison back there is now on our staff. And some of the things that are going out are pretty amazing, the numbers that you see. When Levon sang to his grandson, three Sundays ago or whenever it was, because he lives, I think there's over 100,000 views of that. Well, Levon knows a bunch of people, but he doesn't know that many people. So who's watching that? And so here's a chart that's pretty interesting. This has got Second Baptist in Houston, Prestonwood, which is north of Dallas, Pine Lake right here in our own backyard, First Orlando, First Dallas, and First Jackson. And it's ranked by the blue bar, and the blue bar is membership, attendance, whatever you want to call it. And so obviously we're the smallest church on that grouping. Those are large churches in the Southern Baptist Convention. But the orange is the number of social following that each church has. And you can see we compete very favorably. We have a very strong presence in social following compared to those larger churches. The gray bar is what's called engagement, where somebody shares or they like or make a comment or somehow you know that they saw it. And you can see our level of social engagement is much higher than some of the others. So we have the ability to do it. We just don't have the tools to do it. The tools we're using to do our television are the same tools you use to do social media. So when they go to edit stuff and make clips and put them out and those kind of things, they're working with this old technology that we're talking about, which is very inefficient, and it's just, we're just pretty far behind. Live stream is what is happening tonight. It's where she set up this camera in this room and she's sending it to a few people. I think she's going to run it to the world maybe tomorrow, which I'm not excited about, but we have people, 2,000 views a week on Facebook for live stream. I mentioned Graham Calvert's class. They use that GroupMe app to communicate. On Sunday morning, you'll see them start hitting that app. They're at a ball game in some other city, and they want to know, is it going to be on live stream today? Because they want to watch it. It's just a different world than most of us are familiar with, but it's very important to how we go forward in reaching that next generation. So that television equipment really encompasses a lot of different things. And then finally, we have a contingency of a little over $700,000 in that $8 million number. Richard mentioned furniture over in the CLC. There's probably some other furniture that would be needed as well. We haven't done really anything on that, but we believe we really have a budget of 7.3 for all the things we've talked about, and then a contingency of 700,000 so that hopefully there would be funds there to deal with furniture in an appropriate way. So, will this $8 million recommendation solve our issues? And the answer to that is no, it will not. It's something we need to do. We need to present to the next generation that they are a priority to us, because we don't present that now with our facilities. What you've heard tonight is a recommendation that represents what we need to do, and we've talked about why we need to do it, because we want to reach the next generation, but it does not address the how. And the how is really not our committee's responsibility, but I don't want you to think that nobody's working on it. Our staff had a retreat, you may recall, a month or two ago for 3 days. Leadership was there, and during that retreat, they established a number of things, and one of those is a fairly significant plan of how to reach out in many different ways that we have not been doing. And I think you're going to be hearing more and more about that plan and what the components are and how they're measuring it and those kind of things in the near future. So I just say all that to say that you're hearing part of it in this recommendation tonight of what we need to do and why we need to do it, but the part about actually reaching out to other people is being headed up by our staff and leadership, and you'll hear more about that. It's built around prayer and people and a plan, and those are probably 3 good things to build around. So normally at this time we would invite Cindy Townsend to come up here. I'm sorry she can't be here tonight. She had a commitment in Blue Mountain, so she's up there speaking tonight. When I learned that Cindy was going to return to our staff, I called her, and she had not left the Baptist building yet, but she was fixing to, and she was going to take about a week or so before she started here on the Tuesday after Labor Day. And I told her, I didn't give her any of the details, I just said, there's a group that's working on a proposal that more than likely will require a capital campaign. We talked about for such a time as this, she was here at that time, and I asked her would she work on creating a theme for us, and she said she'd love to. So we met with her on the Thursday. She came to work here on a Tuesday, and that following Thursday we met with her for several hours, and she presented to us a theme that says, did it show up? Where'd it go? Let's skip that. There it is. Did it show up? Yeah. It's called Arise, and it's built after the section in Joshua where Moses had died, and Joshua was called to lead the people across the Jordan on dry land into the promised land, and then God had him go back into the river and pull out rocks and stack them up so that people would know. It would be a sign of remembrance of the faithfulness of God. And Cindy has a whole presentation on this that'll unfold if we choose to go forward that I think you'll find very, very inspiring and very tied into what we're talking about, along the theme of go forward, live forward, and give forward. So we're very close to the end. I know you're ready for that. I am too. Let me talk about one more thing, and then we'll be through. I'll ask Stacy Davidson to come up here and close us. People have asked me, how do I describe this? What is this plan that we're talking about? How would I talk about it? And my description of it is probably a lot different than most people. And you're probably going to say I'm crazy when I say this. But to me, this is the largest mission opportunity our church has ever been involved with. So why on earth do I say that? We got an $8 million request. And we're talking about $200,000 going to Mission First, which is probably what most people would think of as mission related to what we're talking about. That's 2.5%. When we think about our church, when I think about our church, and I think about what we do as a church, our DNA, how we look at the world, we are a mission-active church, in my opinion. We have given to mission causes all of my life that I've been in this church. If we rank all the churches in the Southern Baptist Convention by size of membership or attendance, whatever you want to pick out, Sunday school, we're not in the top 100. We're not in the top 200. I'm not sure we're even in the top 300. We're way down the list. But if you rank every church by giving to a cooperative program, we're going to be right at the top. We'll be in the top 5. Sometimes we're number 1 even. So that means we support Baptist causes. Some of that money that we give through our budget to the cooperative program winds up scattered around the state of Mississippi. Some of it's in foreign lands. Some of it's supporting the seminary where Dr. Allen and the other seminaries are. Some of it winds up over here at Mississippi College and other Christian schools. So it just finds its way in a lot of different places. We are very strong contributors to Lottie Moon and Annie and those other mission-giving opportunities through the cooperative program in Southern Baptist life. And we just give disproportionately. We give a much larger number than the size of our church would indicate, which I'm thankful for. I'm glad we do that. When you think about going on missions, which we've begun doing more in recent years, we've created a GoFund. That GoFund on January the 1st of this year had $132,000 in it. That money is used to scholarship people in our church that choose to go on a mission trip and perhaps need some assistance. We've paid out over $50,000 out of that fund this year. A few weeks ago, the balance in that fund is $218,000. So we start with 132, we take out over 50, and now we have 218 in it. How does that happen? It's probably not been a public request for money, but people just are interested in supporting missions. And if we were to say in some meeting that we got people that want to go and they need some help, there's no money in the GoFund, what do you think would happen? I think we would support it. It's in our DNA. You remember that blue chart that we looked at earlier, and it talks about what's going to happen in the future in terms of our membership unless something changes. Here's another chart This is a chart that covers 8 years. It starts in 2010 and it goes through 2017. And these are the number of givers to our church. In 2010, we had 1,983 givers, and today we have 1,090. That's quite a reduction. You can see that trend line in those red bars. It doesn't, again, take a rocket scientist to figure out what's happening. So if you take this and put it with the blue chart that we looked at earlier, and we think about our mission giving, Bobby Ray gave a report the other day where he's gone through our budget for Doug Rule, and he's come to the conclusion that he can show where 25 cents of every dollar that goes to this church goes to mission causes. If these bar graphs don't change, we will not be able to continue doing that. We won't have the people, we won't have the resources. So when I say this is a mission program, this is a mission to change those numbers so that we can continue doing what we like to do in supporting mission. So that's kind of the approach that I would give to it. Stacy Davidson is going to be the chairman of our deacons in 2018 in January, and he's one of the ones that's had to be in all these meetings, or he's chosen to be here, didn't have to be, but I thank him for doing that, and I ask him to come close us. Thank you for being here tonight.